When I first played Croc Legend of the Gobbos, I went in with an open mind, an open heart, and an open anus. No, I can't start it with that. That's so bad. It doesn't even make sense. Let's try that again. When I first played Croc Legend of the Gobbos, I went in with an open mind, an open heart, and open arms. I didn't really know anything about the game beyond the fact that it existed. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was ready to welcome Croc into the pantheon of brilliant late 90s platformers and recognize it as a hidden gem. But while I enjoyed the game and thought it was decent, it didn't really have the makings of a hidden gem, in my opinion at least. It had a solid foundation, but it had some glaring issues. Amongst other things, the controls weren't ideal, the story and settings were fairly generic, and there was a lack of variety in the gameplay. It fell short of that hidden gem status, which was unfortunate. But that wasn't the end for Croc. While he may have paled in comparison to his PlayStation platforming cousins, he wasn't ready to keel over and die just yet. I mean, crocodiles can live up to 70 years, and at this point he's only in his 20s. You'd be foolish to think that Croc would give up so soon. He had one more game in him, creatively named Croc 2. I know, genius! Croc 2 has quite the mess to clean up if it wants to be a better game than the original, because even though the original was fine enough, there was plenty of room for improvement. And I mean a lot of room. You could fit a whole living room's worth of improvement into that game. Croc Legend of the Gobbos, while decent, was not good enough to be called a hidden gem. With that in mind, let's see if Croc 2 can pull it off. Being plonked in Sailor Village for the first time was a very surprising experience. I was expecting something extremely similar to the first game, but this felt like something totally different. I was already caught off guard when Croc and the Gobbos started chatting like bootleg Banjo-Kazooie characters, so when I came to and realized that I was in an explorable hub world instead of a map, I didn't know what to think. But I embraced the change and went with it. I started walking around and I nearly cried. The controls. They're beautiful. The tank controls are gone. Croc can move well now. That was one of my biggest concerns going into this game. I was dreading that Croc 2 would also have those horrible tank controls from the first game, but as it turns out, the developers hired someone with common sense, so now Croc is comfortable to control. Beyond that, his movement and abilities are pretty much exactly the same as the first game. Perfect, that's all it needed to be. Now on to how this game works. It's very different from the original Croc. The original Croc was much more linear in its progression. You had a world map consisting of 4 worlds, each with 6 levels and 2 bosses, and you progress through them in a predetermined order. Nothing wrong with that. Croc 2 takes a different approach. Rather than a world map, we've got a hub world system here. There are 4 hub worlds, each with a handful of levels and bosses too. Apart from the bosses, you can take on the levels in any order you like. Nothing wrong with that either. I don't think one of these is outright better than the other, but I do like getting to explore a little bit. It helps give a better sense of the world you're in. It was also an opportunity to learn about the different mechanics. Rather than life and death being based on holding gems like in the first game, Croc 2 introduces a hit point system independent of gems, which is much better. It just makes more sense. And you can even upgrade how much health Croc has by buying potions using gems you've collected. I like that, it's a good change. Even though the hubs are nothing special, it's nice to just have a bit of a wander and take in your surroundings, talk to NPCs, go for a shop, and just chill out before cracking on with some levels. But that's not what the game is about. Croc 2, much like its older sibling, is a platformer. Let's just recap what the original Croc was like. Legend of the Gobbos was a very basic 3D platformer. Every level was linear and comprised of various interconnected rooms that pretty much all looked the same, with the simple objective of reaching the end and whacking the gong. The platforming challenges mainly involved jumping, but some other techniques occasionally came into play as well, and that was completely fine. It was a decent gameplay experience. The only problem with it was that the game did end up feeling repetitive. There was a lack of variety in the gameplay that resulted in a little bit of monotonousness. Other than that, it was a solid formula. In terms of the actual gameplay, Croc 2 is pretty much the same, most of the time at least. It's very much the same running and jumping through levels as in the first game, but because of Croc's improved controls, it's a lot more enjoyable. But it's not as simple as that. While the core gameplay is the same, Croc 2 tackles the first game's repetitiveness issue head on. Because rather than recycling the same hit the gong objective over and over again, Croc 2 gives each level a unique objective. And I realised this by the second level I played. Sometimes you'll be required to rescue a gobbo from a cage. Other times you'll need to find some treasure chests. You might need to catch a thief or chase a train, rescue gobbos from forest fires or free them from being stuck in caves. You never really know what a Croc 2 level is going to ask you to do. Some levels aren't even linear. There's one level where you need to explore a town and round up 30 baby Gobbos and take them to their pens. It's the same fundamental platforming, but it's applied in a different way, and I really like that. It's the perfect sort of variety where it doesn't deviate from the core gameplay too heavily, but it adds the right amount of spin to keep things interesting. It's brilliant. And it also helps to make levels more memorable. I know I won't be forgetting Roger Redant and his gauntlet of explosive-based platforming anytime soon. I'm glad that Croc 2 opted for the good kind of variety. The bad kind of variety really sucks the fun out of games like this. Things like terrible vehicles and weird gimmicks can really ruin the whole experience, so I'm relieved that Croc 2 doesn't— fuck! I don't understand what it is with platformers. Why is it that they feel the need to shoehorn in vehicles like this? Does no one realize that most of the time they fucking suck? Croc 2 was doing so well on the variety front. There was honestly no need for this. Croc 2's vehicles aren't the tedious and frustrating kind, they're the boring and dull kind. Every vehicle in Croc 2 is incredibly boring. Boat, boring. Hang glider, boring. Hot air balloon, boring. They're all boring. I spent 2 whole levels collecting wheels for this cart to race the Dantinis with, and it is one of the most boring things I've ever been involved with. At least the boat race has a shortcut. The only vehicle that was even vaguely interesting was the snowball ride, but even that wasn't very good. It's like the Atmosphere in Crash Bandicoot The Wrath of Cortex, only worse. Way worse. It's such a shame. The thing is, I'm not totally against vehicles. If they're done well, they can be very enjoyable, but the vehicles here in Croc 2 are just nothing. It really is one of this game's biggest weak points. Speaking of weak points, let's talk boss fights. I'm not gonna mince words here. The boss fights in the first Croc game were fucking terrible. Like, they actually, genuinely sucked ass. Some of the worst fights I've ever seen. They barely even qualify as fights. Even Toasty could fuck these chumps up. Thankfully, Croc 2's boss fights are much better. I mean, the bar was low, the bar was pretty much on the floor. Croc 2 could have cleared the bar just by walking past the bar. Now don't misunderstand me. I don't mean to imply that the boss fights in Croc 2 are in any way good. I'm just saying they're a lot better than what the first game had to offer. They at least have more layers than running away until there's an opening. You actually need to do things in order to beat the boss, and I can appreciate that. But they're still pretty sucky. Still, an improvement is an improvement, and I'm happy and proud that Croc is making progress. Unfortunately though, I'm not done complaining. Typical me always got something to bitch about. During the Village Masher boss fight, I noticed that the camera is fucking awful. Admittedly, the camera wasn't great in the first game either. You had no control over it, it would just automatically follow whatever direction Croc was facing. But in that game, it wasn't too much of an issue since everything is linear. But Croc 2 uses the same camera system. Again, it's fine in a linear level, but when you're in an arena, like in the Village Masher, or you're in a non-linear environment, the camera refuses to cooperate with you. It does whatever the hell it feels like, getting stuck on things and just not showing you what you need to see. I don't get why you would design a camera like this. Are the developers not aware that I need to see the giant purple cyborg dinosaur to be able to fight it? Am I just supposed to instinctively know where it is? Surely that must have pissed them off when testing the game. Why was nothing done about it? You idiots! I spent well over 20 minutes fighting this thing, all because I couldn't fucking see what the hell was going on. It's bullshit! You're wondering why I'm getting so angry about one instance in the game when the camera is bad? Well, the truth is, I've just had a hot chocolate and I'm off my fucking tits! In short, camera bad sometimes. Moving on. Let's talk presentation now, because that was one of the things the first game did really well, especially in the music department. The first game's soundtrack was groovy as hell. It was so good that I've actually had it planned to play at my funeral. I've also attempted to get Croc music to play at basketball matches, nightclubs and on the radio, and I've also tried to get the Croc 1 desert theme to replace the Australian national anthem. Haven't heard back from the government yet, but that's typical government for you, completely ignoring the people and their desires and such. What a world we live in. Maybe I should contact my local MP to see what she can do about it. Anyway, the music in the first game was fantastic, and that's no different for Croc 2. The music in Croc 2 is just as brilliant as it was in Legend of the Gobbos. I was whistling along pretty much the whole time. It definitely helped maintain the will to live, as I slowly drove around an incredibly boring racecourse for 4 very long minutes, that's for sure. Whoever the composer was for this game and its predecessor did an amazing job, and they should be very proud of what they put together for these games. And that's just genuine, no jokes, none of my typically strange comments about harvesting human livers or using a dragonfly as a dildo or anything like that, just a candid, simple compliment. Well done, mate. The visual side of the presentation in the first game was okay. It was by no means bad, but it was fairly generic. There was nothing about the environments or settings that really stood out as being noteworthy. It was fine, but it wasn't anything special. Croc 2 does make more of an effort. The levels and environments are more stylized and specific, they look more unique, and they stand out more, and that's great. The levels aren't just collections of rooms that look identical, they feel like actual locations. It's certainly also improved by the presence of characters like the Thief and Roger Redant, who helped make each level feel more alive. I'd say across the board, Croc 2's visuals are pretty good. Oh no, that's not right. What I should have said is that Croc 2's visuals are pretty good when you can see them. Croc 2's draw distance is absolutely appalling. I didn't notice it until I got to the Inca village, so it wasn't a glaring issue, but once you've noticed it, it's impossible to ignore, and it's pretty gross. It's hard to appreciate the environment you're in when half the time you can't even see it. To demonstrate just how bad it is, let's make a comparison. In Croc 2, released in 1999, you can only see just a bit ahead of you. In Spyro the Dragon, released in 1998, you can see all the way to the fucking moon. What happened? Why is it so bad in Croc 2? I'd really like to be able to take in the level themes and appreciate the atmosphere, but it's very hard to do that. It's a shame because the game does generally look pretty good. Oh well, despite not being able to see anything unless it's pressed against Croc's face, the presentation in Croc 2 is undeniably solid. I feel like there's something I've forgotten about. Sorry, let me just check my notes real quick. Let's see. Controls, hub worlds, hit points, variation, vehicles, bosses, talked about all that. Milk, bread, freshly harvested human livers. Oh, hang on, that's my shopping list, sorry. Camera, music, visuals. I do apologize, this is really embarrassing. I don't know. Oh, the story! Yes, the story. I need to talk about that. So, what even was the story? Oh, that's right, irrelevant. It was irrelevant. Genuinely, I had no idea what the story of Croc 2 even was until I was over halfway through the game. It really isn't even a vaguely important part of the game. Well, I say story, but it seems to be two separate stories, both going on at the same time. After the events of the first game, Baron Dante is brought back from the dead, I think, and decides to kidnap a Gobbos scientist who just happened to walk by as the Dantinis were doing their satanic summoning dance. What he intends to do with Dr. Gobbo, I have no idea. Meanwhile, and completely unrelated to that whole shebang, Croc receives a letter believed to be from his long-lost parents, and he sets off to find them. There's potential for a single good story here, but it's just two mediocre stories happening at the same time, and neither really develop at all. Surely there could have been a way to combine the two, maybe have Baron Dante kidnap Croc's parents as revenge for defeating him, just intertwine the stories like that somehow? But no, two stories that barely even deserve to be called stories that have nothing to do with each other. That's the ticket, step aside The Last of Us, this is what peak storytelling looks like. That being said, I definitely think Croc 2 handles its story better than the first game. At least the characters speak and let you know what's happening. In the first game, you've got no idea what anyone's motives are because none of them speak. And besides, it was somewhat heartwarming seeing the Croc family reunited at the end of the game. A mother and father finally getting to see their lost son again. It's a beautiful moment. Sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional. I just can't imagine what it must be like to go through something like that. It must have been so hard. Just kidding. Those were only crocodile tears. Sorry. The story isn't the best, but it's a slight improvement over the first game, and at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It's the gameplay we were worried about here, and the gameplay is mostly great. Although, in saying that the gameplay is mostly great, it wasn't great enough to the point where I was willing to go through and 100% the game. I had the same feelings here as I did in the first game. I simply could not be arsed. I do appreciate that the color gems are handled better in Croc 2, rather than being hidden in plain sight or just slapped around in any old corner. They're located in hard to reach areas off the beaten path. That's an improvement. But I'm not sure about having to buy certain items from the store using the gems you collect in order to collect all the color gems and receive a golden gobbo. It sounds tedious and kinda rubs me the wrong way. So yeah, not really willing to go for 100% in this game. I'm not giving my hard-earned gems to a knockoff moneybags all in the pursuit of nothing. I'm not an idiot. I don't care if Baron Dante is stealing the Croc family's eggs, even though he's supposed to have died again. I'm not doing that shit. Anyway, I think it's time we wrap this up. On the whole, I think Croc 2 is a pretty good game. It's certainly a step up from the first Croc game. The controls, level design, variety in gameplay and boss fights have all been improved, some more drastically than others. The controls are smoother and more responsive, the levels are more interesting, each one feels distinctive with a unique objective to complete, and the bosses have gone from being totally shit to just a bit shit. The game is presented a lot better as well. But Croc 2 does have some weak points. The vehicles were a mistake. They add basically nothing of value and are, at best, boring. The boss fights, even though they have been improved, are still fucking bad. The camera is really dodgy in places, and the draw distance is shocking too. There are definitely things wrong with it, but overall I enjoyed the experience. Croc 2 is surprisingly good, and I had fun playing it. I was honestly expecting a repeat of the first game where it only ended up being okay, but I was wrong. Croc 2 is a good game. While the original Croc game may not have been good enough for it, the sequel picks up the slack, and I can confidently say that Croc 2 is a hidden gem. To be honest, I kind of wanted this game to be bad, so I could call it a crock of shit. But it is a good game, and I genuinely wasn't expecting that. So if you're in the mood for a simple but fun platformer, Croc 2 could be the perfect game for you. Or you could play something like this, which is clearly much, much better.